Welcome to Cold War Conversations, the home of real stories of the Cold War.
It's not going to happen in this life, but if I ever wanted to work for the British security services in any shape or form, would it count against me? Would they be able to know that I was a member of the Great Britain GDR Society?
This is Cold War Conversations. If you're new here, you've come to the right place to listen to Cold War history. Please make sure you follow us in your podcast app so you don't miss future episodes. Andrew was a British modern languages student in 1989. He recounts the serendipitous moment when he stumbled upon an advert for a work and holiday trip to East Germany. The trip was organised by the Great Britain GDR Society, which allowed participants to experience life behind the Iron Curtain. The only requirement was to join the society, which piqued the curiosity of Andrew, who had previously visited West Germany and had yet to set foot in the East. As the group engaged in work on a building site, they encountered East German soldiers and workers sharing stories and forging unexpected friendships. I'm delighted to welcome Andrew to our Cold War conversation.
Yes, well, my contact was in 1989 when I came out of a lecture one morning at university. And I saw an advert, a simple A4 sheet, black and white, advertising a work and holiday trip to East Germany. So this was spring, summer 1989, and the actual trip was going to be July, August 1989. I think the cost was £120, something like that. And the only condition was you had to join the Great Britain GDR Society, which I think was for a tiny fee, probably £5. So I did the necessary, joined the society, contacted them, and then obviously I got the details of the trip, and it was a 3 or 4 week trip in the summer holiday, the end of my second year, doing a modern languages degree at Oxford. I was going to Germany anyway for the whole of my third year, to Bavaria. At that time, I hadn't been to Germany as much as I'd been to France, so it was a particularly good opportunity and an unusual one to go, obviously, to the GDR in what would turn out to be, the very last weeks of the GDR as we knew it.
Absolutely. Were you a fan of left-wing politics? Question I have to ask, or was this just an opportunity to experience the other Germany, I guess, because you'd been to West Germany, but not East Germany?
That's right. I had been to West Germany, not that much, but no, I wouldn't say I was a fan particularly of not communist politics anyway. There was no kind of investigation about that, A feature of the trip, it seemed to me, was very much they were trying to impress upon us how brilliant it was in a communist society. So they would take us to restaurants, etc. The bill would be endless, you could have whatever you wanted. But if they thought that we hadn't noticed we were about the only people in these restaurants, they must have thought we were quite dim, I think, not to have noticed that.
Did you need to go to any meetings or receive any publications prior to going on the trip, or was it just a transaction and you were told where to go and when?
It was the latter. There was absolutely no requirement to go to any meetings or express any political sympathies with the GDR regime. So it was literally a formality to join the society. And obviously all I was interested in was going on the trip.
I mean, presumably once you get a membership pack through, did that come with any publications or propaganda?
I think it may have done. I think there might have been some magazines in there, 1 or 2 things. I mean, for quite some time afterwards, I received something called the GDR Review. I can't remember if that was a monthly or probably a 3-monthly publication. I don't remember. But I've got quite a few editions of that. So, yes, I think it did come with a few supplements. And fairly direct and to the point instructions about what to do. I think it was quite soon after I responded. It wasn't like a whole year later or anything like that. I think it was probably just 2 or 3 months later the trip was. I get the impression that they did this quite regularly, well, at least yearly. The guy who led our trip, he certainly had been before.
What did your parents' friends think about your proposed trip behind the Iron Curtain?
No, they were quite happy with it. I met with no resistance or advice to the contrary, as I recall. It all seemed pretty sound. The place we were dealing with had got a premises. Everything had got an address at the top of the letters that came, and the instructions. So I was quite confident in that respect. I didn't know anybody else who was going, and in the event there was one other person from my university who was in the year below, who I had never met before. The students were drawn from all over the country, actually.
Was there a briefing as to how to behave over there or anything like that? Because, you're, I don't know, representing the UK abroad.
There was nothing like that. Do you know what I mean? We literally met at Liverpool Street Station, bound for Harwich, and then obviously the ferry, and then I think it was Hook of Holland straight across to Berlin, you see. And by which time you're forging friendships. Everybody's the same. I think very few people on the trip knew someone else.
And the trip itself was a work holiday. So did they detail how much work and how much holiday there was going to be?
I think it was more work than holiday. It was either 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. But there was very little detail, probably no detail about what the work would be.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, yes, I think there can't have been. Because it was on a building site in the end, and we weren't builders, we were students. We were mostly German students, I think, language students.
You go to Harwich to the Hook of Holland, so where do you cross the border into East Germany?
Oh, is that a place called Helmstedt, I think? Well, whatever the railway crossing is, yeah. That was Helmstedt. Okay, so that was obviously a delay, and everything properly done, visas. Yeah, now visas, what? They must have provided all that sort of thing, I think. I don't remember applying for special visas.
When you arrive in Berlin, do you come into West Berlin and cross into the east, or are you arriving directly into the east?
Well, we will have gone through part of the west, won't we? Because Friedrichstrasse was the big entry point. And that, again, was a major, major delay. A lot of waiting around. A great feeling of uncertainty. I can remember that quite well, standing in a long queue and it just being very static. So I also remember, because it was the evening when we got there, I can really vividly remember seeing sections of the Berlin Wall lit up, from the train. That's quite a vivid memory I've got. But it was Friedrichstrasse. So yeah, where do you go in?
So you would have come into Zoo Station in West Berlin, and then a few more stops over the wall by the Reichstag, and then into Friedrichstrasse.
That's it. It would be that, wouldn't it? Of course. I don't remember. I'd never been to West Berlin, you see. So, that is very familiar to me now, what you've just said, but I won't necessarily have expected Zoo Station at the time.
Yeah. And aside from the waiting around and the lights of the Berlin Wall, what were your first impressions of East Berlin?
Well, I think we were just nervous, we were a lot of anticipation, wondering where we were going to be sleeping that night, because it was getting towards that time of day. Yeah, just nervous excitement, I think, a bit of tension. I was 20. Most of us were, all of us, I think, were university students, undergraduates. So I guess it was pretty exciting. I mean, they took us for a meal somewhere. I remember that. It's sort of a big canteen-style meal place. And then it was back to this camp that I've wondered about quite a lot since. And I think is probably a Lidl or Raver store now, in a place called Milesdorf, which is way out east. It was 50 minutes an hour from Unter Linden, Brandenburger Tor. Yeah, the camp, I'm pretty sure, was south of the station, south of Milesdorf station. I have found somebody who claims to have pinpointed it in the last few weeks, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously it's not there now and it's been built over.
Did you take many photos when you were over there?
I've got some photos, yeah, mainly from the building site and the other tourist visits that we did, yeah. I don't think I've got many photos on the camp, if any, which is frustrating. It wasn't the same taking photos, was it, in 1989? It was quite an effort,
Well, it was. I did an interview with somebody the other day. I can't remember who I was speaking to, and I said, God, what I wouldn't have given for having a digital camera when I was in East Berlin and just being able to shoot everything. Because I was in East Berlin in June 89. So again, just before the whole thing fell apart. And so glad I got there while it was still the divided city.
I did take some photos from the top of the TV tower. And I went back in June 1990 from Regensburg, where I was doing my year. So I've got a lot of photos from then. That was my first time back in Berlin, when, of course, everything had changed.
So the accommodation that you were in, was that? It sounds like you were in tents or in huts or something.
No, not tents, not huts. They were brick buildings. I mean, they were like just like dormitories, I think, in sort of one-story brick buildings, around a camp, which had got a road going through it. It had got some outbuildings. There was like a sports pitch in the middle between the blocks. So that's where we stayed for that work phase, the first 2 or 3 weeks. It was pretty basic, And we had some meetings in these outbuildings. I remember groups coming to speak to us. The FDJ, the German youth, the Freie Deutsche Jugend, came to address us. It obviously was a propaganda mission for them, clearly. One of our group dared to say, oh, these uniforms and there's this name with Jugend in it, you are beginning to sound like the Hayot, the Hitler Jugend to me. What's the difference? Which, one or two of us were looking in the floor at that point and thinking, be careful, be careful.
Yeah, what was their response to that faux pas?
I think maybe our leader just kind of interjected and just kind of, calmed it down before any great offence was shown or taken. I think that kind of thing happened once or twice, during the whole thing.
So it sounds like you really did have a mixed bag of people on this trip. Can you describe some of the other participants? Because there must have been some there who believed in real and existing socialism.
Well, I remember there was a girl from my home county, Lincolnshire, who called herself a Polish version of her first name, And, maybe she was really left-wing and, pro-communist. And I think there were some who probably did go because they genuinely loved it and, and embraced it. I'm not really sure. I mean, we were busy, most of us, I think, were busy enjoying the opportunity to be in a city like that. I mean, I'm very much into German literature. I was at the time. So to be able to go out in a small group of already made friends, in the evenings after the building work is done, after we've been back to Milesdorf, we've taken the S-Bahn back in to really very adjacent to where we're doing the building. And we're walking to the Berliner Ensemble, the Theater am Schiffbauerdamm, Brecht's theatre. These are students, myself included, who have done a Brecht play for A-level, just a couple of years before. It was great to think that you're walking these streets. The Komische Oper was there on Behrenstrasse. Unter den Linden was already, known to us, and obviously Alexanderplatz, we would go there in the evenings very late and feel extremely safe. I mean, the only thing we were scared of was crossing those big wide roads and getting arrested for not waiting for the green man. That was something that was said. But midnight and the small hours, we were having drinks in the Nikolai Viertel, and there were hatches here and there, takeaway pizza was available. It wasn't the greatest pizza, but that was fine. So, it really did feel free and open and safe. I do distinctly remember that, which was a great thing. I'm not sure if you would have felt like that in a Western capital in those hours,
When I was in Berlin, I was there for 2 weeks, staying in West Berlin. But did come over to the east loads of times because I was just fascinated by the fact that there was this divided city, and went and saw a classical music concert at the concert hall on that square, the Gendarmenplatz.
I know. I was there a few weeks ago. I know what you mean exactly.
Yeah, saw a classical music concert there, and it was something like 50 pence or something, the ticket. But then we had to make sure that we got the train back before midnight because the day visas expired at midnight.
Okay.
Whereas you could, stay up. I mean, how late did stuff stay open in East Berlin?
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering that, but because we were going back to Milesdorf for the second time in the day in the small hours, so the S-Bahn was still working. Yeah, I mean, there wasn't much open and there wasn't much going on, but I think that's probably why we liked it. You could literally roam down these incredible boulevards, I think that was part of the appeal, really. The thing is, we then were up really, really early to go back to the building site. Early. I think we were working, in inverted commas, from about 6 a.m. at the latest. So you're getting the picture that there wasn't much sleep being had.
Were you being paid for this work, or did you have to exchange a set amount of money when you came into Ostmarks?
I think they must have given us a small amount of money, which is basically all we needed because they were feeding us. And I don't remember changing money. I do remember the Lustgarten area. I remember that being paved back then. And I remember some of our group exchanging money, basically, exchanging dollars or pounds or whatever for Ostmarks, which I think was quite a common thing, but everybody was looking over their shoulder a bit, But I think they gave us money for the work, but we didn't need much, We had plenty for what we needed it for. They took us everywhere. They must have taken us on coaches at the weekend, for example. We did quite a few visits. I mean, they took us to Sachsenhausen and Cecilienhof in Potsdam, Sanssouci. We went up the TV tower. We went into the Brandenburg Gate, where they showed us some like a CCTV room. All these black and white monitors showing cameras trained on the wall. I've thought since, when I've looked at pictures of the Brandenburg Gate from that era, how could I have gone into that? There's not enough room. Where is there a sort of inside to it? But there is. I mean, you can see at either side there are some steps up, and there are some doors. So we definitely did that, and that's I remember that. And they did this with pride, They're sort of showing you how incredible their surveillance system is. How could they not have thought that this was something to be ashamed of? Watching the civilian population like this.
Well, I guess they're trying to show you how effective the border is defending it against the capitalist West. Because I did do an interview with a woman called Katja, who was the daughter of an East German admiral, and she went into a museum within the Brandenburg Gate that they had there. Must have been quite a small museum, because effectively it was in no man's land. I mean, it was in the no man's land area, the border. It was beyond the first line of the barriers there.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, that whole area has always fascinated me because that's where our building site was. This Gelände, this patch of land. So from the Brandenburg Gate southwards towards Potsdamer Platz, between what is now Ebertstrasse and Wilhelmstrasse, that's where this big building site was that we went on for 2 or 3 weeks in the summer of '89. Some of our group were detailed to go up, I think it was Pankow, or somewhere in Prenzlauer Berg. I regard myself as one of the lucky ones because I was in this bigger group, I think, who went to that building site, which is, of course, where all those quite swanky flats are. I mean, part of it is also where the Jewish monument is, isn't it? There's Gertrude Kolmarstrasse, which runs sort of in between Wilhelmstrasse and Ebertstrasse. What I do remember is Otto Grotewohlstrasse, which was the former name of Wilhelmstrasse, wasn't it? Obviously, it was Wilhelmstrasse before Otto Grotewohl as well. So, yeah, I mean, it was just a sort of derelict or barren landscape that was being repurposed. There was talk of Katharina Witt, the ice dancer, and Erich Honecker's daughter, Erich and Margot Honecker's daughter. They were two names that somehow we picked up were going to have one of these luxury flats that would eventually be built where we were digging foundations, like literally with spades. You know what I mean? It was never going to happen. That was just an excuse to get us into the country and give us something to do. The colleagues on the building site, many of them, there must have been some professional builders, but many of them were soldiers from the People's Army. So Volksarmisten. I mean, that's who we've kind of mixed with and had our tea breaks with. So that was interesting. One of them said, to me one day, if we keep digging, we might dig up the Führerschädel, so Hitler's skull. It was very much where the bunker was. That was part of the building site terrain. And one building at the sort of southern extreme on, Vossstrasse, where Hitler's chancellery was.
Yeah. There
is a building the other side of that, which is now part of the facade to the new Mall of Berlin. It's like a sort of sandstone or brown building with bullet marks hidden. I do remember that standing, and I've looked at what that used to be. It was some kind of transport ministry building that has been skillfully incorporated into the new facade of the Mall of Berlin, the car park that goes down, and then that big open area where you can sort of walk through and to the left and right. So, it's quite fresh in my mind, a lot of that. Obviously, it's been completely built over. In fact, June 1990, when I did go back, those flats were miraculously up. And the previous July, it was just this kind of dry, barren landscape with some masonry, which, was probably World War II ruins. So there was a dramatic transformation in the,
Yeah, I know the flat. I know exactly the flats you mean. I think Marcus Wolf got one of them as well, the Stasi guy. But the NVA soldiers, were they Bausoldaten, so people who had conscientiously objected to carrying arms and who were doing manual labour?
I don't think so. I mean, they were uniformed. I just remember from our chats with them, obviously we could speak German. They were from all over East Germany. There were Saxon accents in there, Berlin accents, And I remember one of them saying, if only I were a bird and could fly over the wall, and I'd just be fantastic. It would just be fantastic to be able to go over there. One of them had got a newborn son that he hadn't seen. So it was very sort of harsh conditions they were serving under. We learned from them that they'd been waiting 12 or 13 years for their car, some of them, which was pretty typical, I think. So we certainly had the opportunity to associate with them and hang out with them. And I've got photos of all that, really. Just we were sitting around a lot, The foreman, I remember, I've not met many Germans called Alphonse, but he was called Alphonse. He was drunk from 6 a.m., schnapps. He was just always drinking schnapps. So it was a very, very shoddy, work-shy, aimless kind of operation that he was presiding over. There were a lot of porter cabins. I remember getting changed in the porter cabins. We looked like extras from 1984 in these sort of dark blue and dark grey overalls that they gave us. That caused some amusement. And the food, was absolutely shocking, like really fatty pork and hardly cooked, but boiled, I just didn't really like the food that they were giving us at lunch break. We must have finished quite early in the afternoon, though, because we started at 6 a.m., I think, Yeah, I think we made the most of it in terms of having interesting chats with the workmates. I remember one guy wanting to take out one of the girls in our group, and I remember lending him some clothes, Probably asked me the day before, can you bring me some proper clothes so I can take this girl out? Who was obviously willing to go out with him in the afternoon.
Incredible. I'd love to see those photos. If you can share
Yeah,
those with me.
I've got them somewhere in a box.
Would be really interested to see those. So you're actually right up against the Berlin Wall.
Oh, some of the photos I've got have got the white wall in the background. Yeah, which will be the one that I imagine went down Gertrude Kolmar Strasse, so I think it's now called. I probably believed for a while that it was the Ebertstrasse axis, the one that sort of curves around the back of the Brandenburg Gate and then just carries on down. The one that I think that was Hermann Göring's Strasse in World War II. So I think it must be, because that is a complete no man's land, isn't it?
It was a huge expanse. It was probably the widest bit of no man's land in Berlin.
Yeah. So we were, obviously our porter cabins and building site were not on that bit. There is it's just sort of a green area, isn't it? Our building site was between, I imagine, the axis of Gertrude Kolmar to Otto Grotewohl Strasse. Yeah.
I'm going to see if I can find some Allied reconnaissance photos to see if I can pick out your porter cabins or even some figures around the foundations of that, because there must be some somewhere.
Well, there was something on Twitter a few days ago, yesterday, I think, do you know Jens Schöne? I don't know what.
Yeah, I think I follow him.
Yeah, he sent a picture. It's a little bit like that quite famous picture taken from the roof of the Reichstag, looking towards the Brandenburg Gate, and there's like a vast expanse in the background going southwards. But this one, well, it was one of these on this day things. So I saw it a day later, but I think it was 10th of October, 1989. And you can see the porter cabins, actually. So that's a very recent tweet. I was looking at that yesterday afternoon. I've also got a picture from somewhere that I use in my school trip booklet, because I take trips to Berlin every 2 years. And I've found some pictures of the building site from the other end. I think they might be 1988 instead of 1989, but you can see the little bit of infrastructure of the building operation that's going on. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely partly in the area of the Führer bunker.
I think they did unearth bits of the Führer bunker in the building of those, because I remember I used to get a magazine called After the Battle, and there was one copy where they'd actually got access to it, weirdly.
Yeah.
I have to see whether I could find it. I'd forgotten about that until you
It's
mentioned
incredible,
it.
isn't it? It's just so intriguing, really. And that's just opposite from the former propaganda ministry, isn't it? Do you know that? The other side of what was Wilhelmstrasse. It goes into a square. Really, I think we were sitting on one of my pictures. I think we're sitting with our backs to Otto Grotewohlstrasse. And I think there might be some remains of the old propaganda ministry there. But it quickly opens into a square. It's where that current U-Bahn station that's been renamed is. You know, there used to be one called Mohrenstrasse.
Yeah, Stadtmitte it was for a while as well, wasn't it, I think?
Right.
The one that allegedly the marble in it is from the Führer Chancellery, but I think that's been disproved now.
Right, yeah.
What sort of contact did you have with GDR citizens other than the people you were working with?
Okay, so we had 3 or 4 leaders. I remember a guy called Uwe, and there was Bernd. I can't remember, there was a lady as well. I can't remember her name. I mean, Uwe was very much a sing-song round the campfire type, you know. So he was singing Beatles songs back at Milesdorf, you know. I don't remember any bonfires particularly, but, you know, in the dark, in the twilight, he'd got people outside with a beer probably, and he was singing Beatles songs, you know, he's accompanying himself on his guitar, and everybody was joining in. So that was lovely, I must say. Bern was a lot younger. I mean, they were there to help us just get the best possible time, I think. You know, they were very keen to show us their country, you know, and take us out and about. They didn't go to the building site with us, as I recall. They didn't go to ours anyway. I mean, our leader, Bill, he came to the Otto Grotewohl site, you know, the one right next to the wall. So maybe they went to the Pankow one, I'm not sure. Yeah, we definitely went. Probably she was one of the leaders. A woman took us to her GDR flat, basically. You know, and we all sort of, well, it can't have been all of us because there was 30 or 40 of us, but I certainly remember going into a GDR flat that was basically one big room, you know, well, not that big, obviously, but you converted this settee or whatever, this couch, into, it was their bed as well, you know. I remember that, and some big heavy radiators against the wall. Probably everything painted lime green or whatever, like Unter den Linden station. I did have one slightly strange experience. They took us to a social event in the evening, which was basically turned into a disco, a big disco. And there's a lot of drinking, but also a disco. I think it was in Friedrichshain. What's it called? Volkspark Friedrichshain. I don't know if you know that. It's where it's one of these places built on a lot of rubble. So it's sort of, you climb up as you go further into the park. It's quite wooded. It's the one where there's Märchenbrunnen, fairy tale fountains as you go in.
Yeah, I think there was a flak bunker there during the war.
Yes, yeah. And there is today some kind of cafe, really quite a swish cafe there now. And I think that must be on the spot where we were taken. But I lost my glasses there. I just left them on a table. They were new, and I didn't wear them all the time back then. And I had to, I wanted to get them, you know, so I went back on my own, which was quite strange. The next day, I've still got my East Berlin map with just 1 or 2 locations circled in pencil. Obviously, it's one of those maps where West Berlin just doesn't exist. You know the type of thing.
Brilliant, yeah.
So I reckon I went back to Rosa Luxemburg Platz. That is a U-Bahn station, isn't it? And then walked down a street or two. Very much trams going down the middle of the road. I remember that, but it was quite eerie. I think just sort of being slightly off the touristy centre, the streets that we knew really well and that I'd been together in a big group with, it was a little bit, I felt a little bit uncertain making my way back to this place on my own, under my own steam. But I found the glasses, so all's well that ends well. I remember stopping and phoning my brother on the way back. So everything worked. This public call box, I just thought, well, I'll give this a go. I know the international code. And I remember getting through to my brother with a few coins I'd got, so that was quite good that worked. I do remember seeing an electrical goods shop, and there was this toaster in the window. It had pride of place. It was the only thing in the whole shop. And it was just massive, and it got all these valves displayed on it. It was like looking at one of the first computers or something. And as I say, it was the only item in the shop. And I remember staring at that and thinking, what is going on here? Back in Milesdorf, something else I remember is just walking past this little square quite near the actual station, as we did, sometimes several times a day. A van pulled up, opened its back doors, and it was full of bananas. And as soon as the doors opened, people just flocked from all angles. This delivery of bananas had come. There was no money exchanged hands, nothing. They just went straight up to this van and took whatever bananas they wanted or could carry. So that was quite interesting. And some of the restaurants we ate in, I mean, I don't know, perhaps I'm just lucky and I've, always been well provided for, but I'd never had strawberries out of a tin before, so this seemed to be the height of luxury. They seem to be opening restaurants for us. But the one I'm thinking of there is actually on the holiday part of the trip. It was quite a rustic restaurant, I think, out in the countryside, and they were just really breaking open, pulling all the stops out to give us a good time. But these tin strawberries, which were perfectly edible, but no fresh fruit. Communism. Supply, demand, just not happening,
On the holiday part of the visit, I mean, you mentioned Sachsenhausen and places around Potsdam, pretty close to Berlin. Did you go further afield to the other cities?
Well, the holiday part was in a different location completely. I think it was in the countryside around Dresden. But again, I don't have a location for that, and I've got no chance of knowing where that was really. But we did go to Meissen, the Dresden porcelain place, We had quite a bit of time in Dresden. I remember a lot of railway platforms where there was just, the platforms were very low. You had to climb up onto the trains, into the coaches. It was very, very simple. And as I say, out in the wilds, really, it was very rural. The holiday part. I remember a place called Königstein, which I think is in the Saxon Switzerland. You know what I mean? There's Die Sächsische Schweiz, and we must have gone to some of those nice places down there, which I'd love to revisit. I mean, there's some stunning scenery down there, isn't there? So they, again, they gave us plenty of tours. Looked out. They were very attentive and keen to make sure we enjoyed it, and went back feeling really happy and gratified that we'd had a good experience. I remember going on a lake in the Dresden part of the trip. We were rowing boats on a lake. Some of us were jumping in, because it was the summer. It was perfectly safe to jump in.
Yeah, because when you went to Dresden, I mean, it would have still been in ruins compared to what it is now.
Yeah, that was very much the theme, I think. Yeah, the old Frauenkirche. I mean, there's that big, at the time, it's this massive concrete street. I think it's Prager Strasse. We certainly were round there. We also went to see the Zwinger Palace, isn't it? And the Semper Oper, I think, was shown to us. which I'm not sure if that was part ruin as well at the time. I know that was damaged in World War II. Yeah, there were clearly some ruins back then, which obviously were part of the plan, wasn't it, to leave them and show the horrors of war. I mean, back in Berlin, I distinctly remember, the thing that's called the Neue Wache. It's sort of, I'd say, Karl-Lieb, the guardhouse. I remember that there being a pretty much 24/7 East German goose-stepping guard of honour there. Whereas nowadays, you can actually even go into the Neue Wache, can't you? You can even touch the Kit Kollwitz sculpture in there. Certainly get in it at the time.
In those days, you could get in it, because I remember there was like a glass cube thing with the eternal flame.
That's right.
In there, because it was like it was like their war memorial or their cenotaph.
Yeah, indeed. That it was. So you could get in it if you queued right. I'd forgotten that, but that rings a bell. I mean, what I remember is the bit of German above it from the time, which was typical, to the victims of, I think it was militarism and fascism. Whereas now, well, I don't know if there is something above it, but it's basically a monument to all victims of war, isn't it, and all wars. So the politicisation has naturally gone. So I remember that. I mean, that reminds me of Sachsenhausen. What I remember of that visit is it was just not very well preserved, and I just thought the job of preserving the camp for visitors was pretty shabby and, sort of low key. I mean, what I've learned since, I must have been to Sachsenhausen about 12 times, I think, at least. And apparently the Russians in the early 1960s, the little bit of the camp where there is gas chamber and crematorium, sort of, I think it's northwest, it's certainly top left as you go through the gate. I think it's known now that the Russians did a bad job in trying to sort of save it, to show it. They, I think, caused it to sink into the ground. So nowadays it's got like a big white structure over it, with stilts that are further out, to kind of make sure that what they want to salvage and show actually will still be there in another 10, 20, 30 years, whatever. So that was quite interesting. We also saw a film in there. They made us watch a film, which if you go nowadays, I don't think that's thrust in your face quite in the same way. It was probably because the Russians will have liberated that camp.
Well, I think the Russians took it over and then used it as their own internment camp as well. So,
yeah, which is lesser heard about, straight.
Absolutely. I did get the S-Bahn out to Sachsenhausen, and I found it really strange walking down that street to the main gate, which just felt like a suburban street. And then suddenly you turn the corner and you're at the gates of a concentration camp. I mean, did you feel that you were being watched at times by your minders or anything like that? Or it sounds like you were pretty free to wander wherever you wanted to.
Yeah, I didn't feel watched, Not at all, really. I mean, the leaders, the East German guys and the lady who were leading us, they, I think, were going back home to their families, once they'd sort of entertained us. They weren't, I don't think, living with us. They weren't staying where we were staying. It was a job to them, to take us out and entertain us. I mean, they were working very long hours some days because they were with us, for a long time. But, yeah. No, but there was no pressure or scrutiny on where we were going, what we were doing. That really wasn't part of it. When we went to Cecilienhof, the Potsdam conference site, I found out since some really interesting things. That road, those cobbles as you go up to the manor house, it's called Am Neuen Garten, and there would be a wall to your left as you go up to that. there's a lake on the right, isn't there? I think it's the Heilige See. But on the left, there'd be this wall. And that's a whole small village or small town. I mean, it was basically the KGB's nerve centre within East Germany. I'm fascinated that I was, a few metres from that, and we didn't know anything about it, and maybe our leaders either didn't know anything about it. Not that they would have told us, but now you can go and visit. There's a street called Leistikopfstrasse, and there was like a internment prison. As you go round that sort of circle up to the manor house and then round to the left and back down the other side, there's a Theodor Fontana archive around there. And just opposite that is this, it's a visit now, it's open for visitors. An academic and her team, I forget her name, but they put these Stelen up, these sort of information polls and posts. It's called the Geschichtsfahrt, History Path, in 2014. I was actually there just doing one of my recces for my own trips, and I saw them. I literally saw them putting these information panels up, and spoke to one of them. I think her name was Renata something. But that is just so fascinating to think that all that was there and operational when you and I were both in Berlin in 1989.
Yeah.
Incredible.
I only made it to Cecilienhof and Potsdam after the wall came down, and I had quite a long wander around there. And I remember going through the Dutch quarter of Potsdam, and it was really run down. It's full of squats. And then I reached something like the Russian chapel down there. But one of the things I distinctly remember is there was a crossroads, and there were like 4 wood log cabins at the crossroads, and I must have been really close to where the Soviet barracks were there, because I think there was a big barracks there from what I remember from some of the Bricksmiths episodes that I'd done. Berlin is endlessly fascinating. I mean, what do your students make of your war stories?
Well, I mean, we have quite a big packed itinerary. When we do a trip, we usually say we go on a Tuesday. We don't get back until the next Tuesday. And they do such a great many things on there. So, Cold War is just one aspect of it, isn't it? Obviously, they're interested in World War II. We blend history and museums, and I guess this kind of content, we blend that with recreation and shopping and swimming. We tend to stay in at the Wannsee. There's a youth hostel on the shores of the Wannsee. So, I mean, it's great when we go to the Brandenburg Gate, and quite often we've been to the Denkmal für die ermordeten Juden Europas, the Jewish monument adjacent to the Brandenburg Gate. It's amazing to share with them that this was obviously once a building site, these flats that you can see just to the south, and your teacher was actually working on there, in 1989. And I share that with sometimes we've had a guide speak to us on the surface level of the Jewish monument before you go down underneath. And the guides obviously will speak to what the stones could signify. They'll speak about that, and they let the students go in amongst them to feel the possible disorientation. It undulates, doesn't it? All of those blocks are different heights and things. So, they're quite interested as well, the guides, when I tell them that actually I was there with a spade in my hand, 30 years ago, whatever. Yeah, I like you just said, Berlin, I do say to my students that I don't drink very much, I don't smoke at all, I don't take drugs, but I go to Berlin. it's you know what I mean? It's like
yeah. It is a bit like a drug. It does pull you back. I mean, there's so many layers of history there, as you said. You've got the Wilhelmine era, you've got World War II. You've got so many layers there, and it's a great place to tell German history.
And yet it's really quite a modern city, isn't it, in the grand scheme? But so many layers. I mean, we also do trips to Munich in the sort of alternate years. And the idea that, well, what a contrast, Berlin doesn't rebuild things in the original style, does it? It'll just go with whatever's in the air, whatever's new, whatever takes their fancy, the current generation or whatever. Whereas places like Munich, we also go to Nuremberg quite a lot on trips. Everything is reconstructed, isn't it, in the original style? So it's never the same. I mean, when I go to Berlin, I will have a couple of things that I want to do in the day, and I end up getting to them at about 10 p.m. because I just go down you just come across other things that weren't there last time you were there. So I think I sometimes ask myself, why am I so interested by Berlin? And probably this trip, this experience in the GDR, is something to do with it. I think I was very lucky to come out of that lecture that morning and see this opportunity. As I said earlier, I hadn't been to Germany that much at that point, east or west. I'd been to France a lot more. My school had taken me to France 2 or 3 times by then. But Germany, my French was better at the time. And it kind of flipped when I went to Bavaria for my 3rd year at university. But I used to teach A-level French. I do still teach A-level German, but I used to teach A-level French.
When you went in a shop and used your German, did they sort of look at you and query where you were from or anything like that?
I guess they might have done. I mean, one of the strange things about the shops back then was as soon as you walked in, you had to have a basket. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
They just thrust a basket in your hand. You couldn't walk around a shop without a basket. The shops I remember most, funnily enough, were bookshops. I've still got, I did Thomas Mann as a special author at Oxford, and my Tod in Venedig and other short stories edition was bought in East Berlin. It looked pretty recycled back then. The paper, I haven't quite seen paper that shade, but it's still on my shelf. It has stood the test of time quality wise. So we were picking up. Oh yeah, we brought loads of little pamphlets. That it just seemed quite cool to have, like documents, the writings of Lenin, and I think all these plans, these 5-year plans and all that. That was the kind of stuff they were obviously peddling in those bookshops, wasn't it?
Yeah, I've got a East German statistics book somewhere on my shelf from 1989 showing all these fake numbers that the economy was going to grow by X amount, and there was no foreign debt or anything like that, which I occasionally glance at. It's just an interesting historical piece of a country that's just not there anymore.
Of course. And the newspaper, I mean, what was the Neues Deutschland, wasn't it? Proletarier aller Länder vereinigt euch, wasn't it? And the subtext just beneath the title. So Neues Deutschland, Organ der Sozialistischen Einheitspartei, I think. Loads of stories about Cuba, Vietnam, East German. The harvest is looking good. So-and-so visitors next year. This great, what a great opportunity. So looking forward to visiting our paradise or whatever. And then you could find stories about Western countries if you looked hard enough, but they were just heavily critical and how those countries were abusing their citizens and such like, So I've got a couple of them kicking about, yeah.
What would you say was the most memorable part of the trip? What is the thing that just sticks with you the most?
I guess it's working on the building site. The location of that is just incredible, isn't it? As I think you said earlier, it's right next to the wall. I mean, literally on some photos I've got, you can see the white Berlin Wall. There's porter cabin, there's maybe an old bush or something, there's some people, then there's more wall, So that was an incredible stroke of luck, I think, to be posted there, apparently working on a building site. Sounds very grand. Of course, we weren't builders. Well, it doesn't sound grand, but
sounds very proletarian, I think you could
it's
say.
very proletarian. Yes, it does. Just a pretext to get us there, wasn't it? And they must have been hoping that we would go home full of praise for this incredible state, that everybody was probably a bit down on, because it's communist and we're not communist in the West. So I think the building site, when I think of the trip, it was built around the building site, so to speak. And the location, I don't know where they went in Pankow. I just remember the word Pankow. Now I know where Pankow is. Pankow is the last station on the U2 line. I know it's in that proletariat heartland of Prenzlauer Berg. It meant nothing really to us at the time, but I got lucky really on the site I went to. Working with those folks, I missed them, was incredible. I mean, I think they were soldiers, they rather than builders. They were as bad at it as we were, But Alphonse must have had a tractor or two, around the site, and maybe somebody got hold of the whole project at some point because the flats did go up. You would never have thought there would be any buildings there the next summer from what we were working in. And then there's Milesdorf, this mysterious camp that I actually took the S5 to on one of my trips to Berlin on my own. I just got on an S5. I went into some shops and cafes in modern day Milesdorf. Nobody had got a clue what I was talking about. It wasn't that they didn't want to talk about it, I don't think. They just couldn't relate to what I was saying. I knew which side of the railway line it was. It was south of the sort of east-west axis of the railway. But apart from that, I couldn't really remember much. This guy who I came across about the same time as you and I started corresponding, he claims to have lived in Milesdorf in his youth. So I had a few tweets with him, and he sent a few diagrams and maps. But that was fascinating, staying in that place. Yeah, just some of the meetings we had. They staged these meetings and spoke to us. Bill, our leader, was very articulate, very confident. He had a way of questioning them and slightly putting them on the back foot, making them slightly defensive. He was a graduate at the time, was a bit older and more mature than the rest of us, who were probably about 20. But those meetings that we had, that were all part of the programme, they were quite strange, really. It's just the belief that they would get a group of students over there and convince us what a, paradise this country is for, what is it, the Bauern und Arbeiterstaat or whatever. There's a phrase, isn't there? It's the paradise, paradise, whatever, yeah, state. Yeah. I'd have to say I'd have to say the building site. I mean, I do have a photo from the building site looking north, maybe northwest, where the East German flag is flying on top of the Brandenburg Gate, and the West German flag is flying on top of the Reichstag. Yeah, that was quite a. I mean, it's not great quality. It always looks better in the flesh, but you can probably just see the two flags. They're like dots on the photo, I guess.
Did you stay in contact with any of the other participants?
Yeah, one or two. Because we were, quite a few of us were going to Germany, you see, the year afterwards. So that was, we visited each other more in Germany the year afterwards than we did in the UK, I guess. Actually, we had a reunion. We had a reunion in Cambridgeshire. There was a girl called Jo who lived just outside Cambridge, and she probably invited everybody, to this get together, maybe when we've been back 2 or 3 weeks. So that was good fun. She got a big, spacious house in the country. So it was barbecue and that kind of thing. You know, everybody slept over, sleeping bags. But then I kept in touch with this guy called Davey, who he's from northeast London, but was at university in Nottingham, which is quite near me. But he went to Bochum for his year out, and I remember I went up to see him in Bochum, and he came to see me in Regensburg. But he now is a Brecht expert. He's like an academic. He's worked in different universities, and he writes about Brecht. You know, he's a big authority on Brecht. The guy who was our leader, I mean, I could give you his name, his surname. He's a Shakespeare scholar. It was his trade for years and years. And he's some very big guy, I think, in a university or college in Ireland now.
Because Jack Berlin was one of the organisers of the... Did you have much contact with him? Or did you meet him? No?
Well, I saw him. He, I think, got on our train at Liverpool Street. Well, he did. And I think he went as far as Harwich, you know, and he was probably talking to Bill on that journey. You know, the rest of us were sort of sat in fours and, you know, making our first bridges friendship-wise. So Jack Berlin was there. We knew who he was. He was described as a trades unionist, really, you know, who had sort of fallen into this society, you know. So he, I guess, believed in East Germany, clearly. And the little bits I found on the internet about the society, it was very much lamented, you know, when obviously the Divender, you know, when the Iron Curtain collapsed, etc., etc. He was, it was obviously a subject of some regret to the likes of Jack Berlin, I think. And then obviously the death of the society, I guess. So, you know, he clearly was in it he believed in it, you know, he was in it for the propaganda value of the trips. He believed that we should be convinced of the goodness of this.
The question I normally ask last to people, particularly with experiences like yours, is where were you when you heard the Berlin Wall had opened?
Well, I was in Regensburg, you see, for my year abroad. I was in a job there in secondary schools, part-time. I was reading my texts for coming back to my final year, my special authors, Günter Grass and Thomas Mann. I was reading a lot. I was learning and speaking a lot of German. And I was living in a Catholic Schülerheim, Studienseminar in Regensburg, which I think a long line of Fremdsprachenassistenten in Regensburg had lived in. And we were, you know, we had a common room on our floor. So I was living with other German students, really. And we were watching the news, you know, come in, and it was incredible. Yeah. I went to Regensburg in September. So just a month after the GDR trip. And there was some kind of program where the university assigned a student to people in my position. I remember this girl called Ellie, and I thought she was meeting me to give me a meal on, this would be mid-September 1989. And as soon as I met her, she was really nice and everything. I met her a lot afterwards. I went back to her parents. She lived in the countryside in Bavaria. She was really a nice person. But the first time I met her, she sort of whisked me off, and I needed to help her with something. And she had me in her flat making a fruit salad while she was getting some meat and stuff ready. And basically, she'd also agreed to feed an East German family. So they were parked outside Regensburg flat in their Trabant. It was packed to the rafters with their whole life's stuff. And it was a mum and a dad and a couple of small kids. And we all sat there having a meal in Ellie's university flat, which was incredible. You know, another great experience. So that was mid-September 89. It's not exactly what you asked me. I know that was a couple of months later. But I think my mum and dad were a little bit concerned when I was leaving for Regensburg for a whole year potentially. And we were picking up bits and pieces that cities in Bavaria were being overrun by the first sort of vestiges of, refugees, as it were, coming into the West. And there were stories about people sleeping in gyms and whatnot, So I had this accommodation sorted, and it was for me, and it was in this Catholic boys' home. That was fixed. But I pretty much I soon came to see the influx of the Trabants in Bavaria, in that first month or two.
Yeah, because that would have been September would have been when the Hungarian border had opened, so they'd probably come through that way.
Is that when it? Yes. Well, that's an incredible book, isn't it? The Picnic.
Yes.
Have you seen that one?
I've interviewed the author. I've got an episode with him. Yeah, it's a brilliant story.
I love that book. I just love that book. I want to go there. I want to go to where that sort of little triangle is. It was pretty much happening, from the first time I set foot in Bavaria. I also did come home at Christmas. I think I left Regensburg something like the 19th or 20th of December. I always travelled back and forth on the train because I just love the journey. You go Regensburg up to Nuremberg, Würzburg, then pick up the Rhine north, basically Cologne, and then Aachen and such like. So I always make sure it was in the daylight and by train. But I distinctly remember Regensburg station, the train I was going home for Christmas on. It was packed with Romanians fleeing Ceausescu's regime. And of course he was killed by his own militia, wasn't he? Christmas Day.
Yeah.
1989. Ceausescu, Nicolae Ceausescu, is it Elena? The wife?
Yeah.
So that, again, it all sort of taps into the overall narrative, doesn't it? It was an incredible time to be in Germany, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
I was very lucky,
Absolutely. Have you ever thought about seeing if there was a Stasi file on you?
No, that's not occurred to me. But no, I haven't. Although I've been to the Stasi Museum this summer and a few times in the past. What I have thought of, it's not going to happen in this life, but if I ever wanted to work for the British security services in any shape or form, would it count against me? Would they be able to know that I was a member of the Great Britain GDR Society? That thought has gone through my mind.
Well, a lot of them listen to Cold War Conversations, so you've revealed yourself as the long-term sleeper agent for the Stasi. Or
I'll not be a spook. Let's face it, they won't.
No.
Yeah.
Did you get any impression when you were there that things were not right and that the place was going to fall apart? Because they had local elections, I think, in May, where a number of organisations had clearly seen that they were fraudulent elections, and that was sort of when the unrest started. But you're there quite a bit later. I think you said July, August.
To be perfectly honest, absolutely nothing. That's all I can say about that. We were seeing things from Erich Honecker, what's that quote of his? It's going to last forever sort of thing, I forget the exact wording, but there was nothing, I remember seeing the Palace of the Republic, there was no sign of that being, that was taken down much, much later, of course. It seemed very static and there to stay, is all I can say to that. There was nothing. I don't think our antennae were properly out for that either. You know what I mean? I don't think we were informed enough or political enough to to even sense it. But there was nothing. There was nothing.
The episode extras such as videos, photos and other content are available via a link in the episode information. The podcast wouldn't exist without the generous efforts of our financial supporters, and I'd like to thank one and all of them for keeping the podcast on the road. The Cold War conversation continues in our Facebook discussion group. Just search for Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thanks very much for listening and look forward to seeing you next week.